Hello, everyone. Welcome to Quantum Catechesis. I'm Father Joe Krupp, and you are not. And today is Wednesday, February something?
8th?
2023. February 8th, the year of our Lord 2023. I did not know people didn't know that. AD is Anno Domini. You know that, right? It's not after death. It means the year of our Lord. Did you know that? I didn't know people did. Anyway. What were we doing? The show! So I'm so happy. It feels like forever. And I know it hasn't been, but it's been I guess it's been a long series of days since Friday.
Yep.
Not long in a bad way. Very joyful days. But we have so much to cover. I was telling Care, if we're kind of, well, here's what we got. We're covering the Maccabean Revolt, which I should be able to finish covering today. Easy peasy. But it leads us, I just couldn't walk away. We have to finish, right? Because the Maccabean Revolts, in the end, establish what's called the Hasmonean dynasty, which gets us all the way to Jesus. So why not walk that road, right? And I finished my notes on that about 10 minutes ago. I have us, if you're up for it, and even if you're not, it's what I'm doing. Finishing the Maccabean Revolt and getting all the way to Herod, and it's not that long of a jump, but it might take me this show and one more. So let's see what happens, huh? But in the meantime, huge shout out to Celtic Cove Catholic Bookstore, or as we say, in Oxford, Michigan, and Michigan Church Supply in Mount Morris/Clio, Michigan. Don't forget to support small businesses over big internet stuff, huh? So, I don't think I really have announcements, do I?
Just that all of the foundations
that's right.
are in the playlist.
Series.
Yep.
Now, for those of you who are newish listeners, I think one of the most important things I did on this podcast is this Foundations series. So now, because of Carrie has a ton of free time, right? She barely works. So... You know Carrie works her tail off, folks. And the thing is, I pay her huge money. The other day, I only made fun of her a little bit, which, you know, that kind of steel discipline is its own pay. But be this as it may, what were we talking about? Do you remember? Oh, Carrie organized is it the YouTube or the...
YouTube.
Okay, so if you're more of a YouTube person, and you go over to the YouTube page, you can see there's a whole section, Foundations, and they're all in order. Now, you might wonder where episode 14 went. I can tell you exactly where it went. We didn't do one. It was one of those things where, hey, what number is this? And I went, 15! And I was wrong. But we were pot committed, so we just kept going. So be sure and check that out. And if you would, please subscribe to our YouTube feed and or subscribe to Joe and Black Ministries on your favorite podcast provider. And then also subscribe to it on your least favorite podcast subscriber, but then don't listen to it. So when last we left our intrepid heroes, Judas Maccabee died in a battle that it says, quote, shook the earth. And immediately Judea descended into chaos. And so the people sought out his brother Jonathan, who reluctantly agreed. You know, whereas you have Judas, this beast mode warrior, Jonathan is more wily, and he uses his brain pretty well. So that's where we are. That's where we're gonna start. So when I left you last, Jonathan had secured peace with the Greeks, right? I told you they kind of fought to a standstill, and all Jonathan did was what he had to do to wait till what was always gonna happen. Namely, the Seleucids started fighting each other. And the guy Jonathan was fighting had to go deal with it. So Jonathan held him in a battle at kind of a stalemate until there was trouble back home, and the Seleucid general then, of course, brokered peace and went back home to fight that fight. Now, Jonathan then turned inward and began to purify the countryside, is what we hear. Now, in the end, remember that little how the Greeks, the Seleucids, had to go back and fight there. Well, what Jonathan did was went to the guy who he was fighting, Demetrius, and he said, hey, I'll join your side against your rival claimant, as long as you promise to pull all your troops out of Jerusalem and Judea and release all of our prisoners. So he says to Demetrius, look, you know we can fight. We'll join your side against your rival if you release all our prisoners and pull all your dudes out of Jerusalem and Judea. So Demetrius agreed to it. Jonathan then went to his rival and said, I can't stand Demetrius. I'm going to join you once the battle starts. And that's precisely what happened. He joined in the fight against Demetrius during the fight, and in that earned the gratitude of the Seleucids, as you can imagine, the guy who won. So for the next 10 years, the Jews and Seleucids lived in peace. There were no more Greek troops roaming around, or none worth noting. But then, as happened, another rival claimant popped up, and this guy invited Jonathan to a meeting, like, let's negotiate, huh? Jonathan arrived, was captured, tortured, and executed. Now, that's a good way to make sure you don't get stabbed in the back. Just kill the guy who could, right? So that was the end of Jonathan. And as you can imagine, Judea mourned. Simon, who was the next brother who jumped in. So now we're at the beginning of the Hasmonean dynasty, the descendants of Mattathias, right? The guy who started the whole thing, his son Judas, then Jonathan, and now Simon. Simon went to the rival claimant, did just what Jonathan did, but without the treachery, and just said, that dude killed my brother, let's do this. And he worked with the new Seleucid ruler, drove the old one out, and gained some independence. Now, in the meantime, Jonathan, it started with Judas, continued with Jonathan and Simon. They're negotiating this whole time with the Romans. They're getting aid and supply from the Romans, and each time the cost gets a little tighter and tighter. Rome is doing what she does so perfectly at this point in history, right? Well, we want that area, but we don't want to lose a whole bunch of people, so let's just keep them all fighting each other. Right, the Romans were masterful at this. For example, if you look at their what they did in Britannia, they did this all the time. There'd be 4 chiefs, 4 warlords fighting for control. They'd pick one. Like, they'd say, okay, Carrie, we like you. We're going to support you. And they would fight for Carrie all the time. And then a few years later, when Chuck and I were ticked, right, Carrie's got the Romans on her, she's siding with the Romans and blah, blah, blah. Well, then they'd come to Chuck and say, you know what, Chuck, we're tired of Carrie. We're going to back you.
So they were developing middle school.
They were developing middle school. The Romans were middle school girls on Snapchat. That's what they were doing. And they were doing it, and they did it perfectly here. The Hasmoneans were smart enough and good enough to not have rivals. But what the Romans could do was aid the Greeks, and then when the Greeks start to gain the upper hand, aid the Jews. And in exchange, each time say to the Jews, now we're giving you a lot of aid. We think we should have the ability to have a say in who's appointed governor over here. And then it became, we get to appoint the governor over here. And then it became, this is your new governor, right? This is what the Romans were great at, and this is what they pulled off. They were weakening the Greeks and infusing themselves into the Jewish kingdom, the Hasmoneans, okay? So, how are we doing?
Good.
Are people okay?
Yep.
All right. So now, Simon is in charge. This is about 142 BC. He was both high priest and the prince of Judea. They didn't really call themselves kings yet, but eventually it came into common usage. So, Simon had basically made the Jewish people semi-independent of the Seleucid Greeks, And he reigned from 142 to 135. And he's really the one who kind of finished the job. And he's considered the first to establish this Hasmonean dynasty. Now, ask me why they called them Hasmoneans.
Why?
I have no idea.
No.
Maybe it was a guy who, was taking notes at the time. It was his name. Wouldn't that be hilarious?
Do you think it was the region? A person?
I can't imagine. I can't think of anything that matches up. Right? And it could be like, you look at the Punic Wars when Rome fought Carthage, and you're like, why are they Punic Wars? Because that's what the Romans called the Carthaginians. They called them the Punics. So I don't know. Maybe it's what they called the Jews.
That's interesting because you usually know.
Yeah. I have no idea. And I didn't look real hard, but I couldn't easily find the answer. Yeah. Oh, maybe my lovely research assistant, Chuck.
I'm having the same. I'm trying to find them.
Yeah. Who knows? The Roman Senate in 139 recognized them officially as a dynasty, the Hasmonean dynasty. And remember, they're doing this whole game with the Jews, right? Oh, sure, we'll give you all kinds of aid, but we get the right to appoint a governor over there. The Romans are just slowly, infusing themselves into Jewish political life. So Simon did great. He ruled for a while, and then his son-in-law instigated an assassination of Simon's two boys, Mattathias and Judas, right, who are, of course, named for Simon's dad and oldest brother. And what am I doing?
It says the family's name was apparently derived from an unknown ancestor named Hasmonean.
Hasmonean, which is also, I believe, a kind of painting that's really, clear at a distance, but when you get up close, it's kind of a mess. Yeah. I'm surprised you guys didn't know that. Yeah, Hasmonean. It's a Monet, but when he was smoking weed. It was when he painted while sparking up a doobie. That's in the Bible. Don't look it up. So, in the end, over the next few years, with all this intrigue going on, still the Hasmoneans brilliantly, here's what I wrote, ingeniously expanded their borders. And they had a couple things that helped them. One, the Seleucids were constantly infighting. And as soon as these fights would break out where these two Seleucid governors are fighting, the Jews would go grab the land from one of them, whoever lost, right? Or whoever was over here trying to conquer that guy, well, great, while you're gone, we'll grab your land. And Simon was good at this. The other thing they had working on in their favor was the Parthians. If you ever get a chance to look up the Parthians, these guys are a really interesting group of cats. They were horse archers, which to you and me sounds normal. Nobody had seen this yet. And you may remember I talked to you about this phenomena all through the history of Asia and Europe, of these steppe warriors. Do you remember me talking about this? Steppe warriors. Somebody would unite these tribes every once in a while, like Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, and I can remember, if you give me time, who did it with the Parthians, and get them all on the same page. And if you could even do it for a year, they'd conquer the whole frickin' world. They were just so superior to everyone else in terms of battle tactics. Well, the Parthians got a leader. And they gave the Romans a lot of grief. You may remember in Revelations, there's a vision of riders on white horses shooting bows and arrows. And we read that, and we think, oh, of course. Nobody was doing that at the time. That was truly a prophetic thing, as the Jews, Christians, and Romans saw it. And in fact, this is interesting. I don't know if you know this. The Parthians had this thing where they could shoot backward while riding away. Okay? So they charge at you, all your shields are up. The Romans would make this thing called a testudo. They put all their shields together. Testudo means tortoise or turtle. I can't remember which. And they would cover themselves, and there was just nothing you could do. Right? Your arrows were useless. But then, of course, once the cavalry passes you, you put it down. It's hard to do. Those are heavy shields, and it's hot. So what would the Parthians do as they were galloping away? Turn and shoot, which the Romans weren't ready for. Wiped them out every time. And that's truly, do you know this, where you get the word parting shot, which we call a parting shot. Right? The Romans called it a parting shot because they weren't trained for it, and the first few times they bumped into it, it freaked them out. Right? Who can do that? Who can shoot a bow and arrow while riding a horse, let alone turn and do it behind you while you're riding? Well, the Parthians could. Cool stuff. Anyway, the Parthians were putting a ton of pressure on the Greek states on the other side of the empire. So now the Greeks are getting squeezed. They've been pushing against the Jews. They've been fighting against the Romans. And now the Parthians are coming. So those two things helped them a lot. The Greeks were focused on killing each other and fighting the Parthians, and the Hasmoneans were like, that's a nice little town you got there without any guards. Be a shame if something happened to it. By the time you get to 110 BC, the Hasmonean prince John, and I think I'm saying his name right, Hyrcanus, stretched their borders farther than they had been in the time of King David. Right? Holy cow. They force converted the pagans there. This is how, you remember that Roman historian I told you about, Josephus? This is how he recorded it. Quote, Hyrcanus subdued all the pagans and permitted them to stay in the country if they would circumcise their genitals and make use of the laws of the Jews. And they were so desirous of living in the country of their forefathers that they submitted to circumcision and the rest of the Jewish ways of life. At which time, therefore, this befell them, that there were hereafter no others than Jews. So his point is, the people who lived there liked the Jewish rule. They loved the land, so they submitted and became Jews. And at this point in history, at least as far as Josephus saw it, there was only Jews there. That's it. So the Jews were free at this point of foreign influence or fear. The Greeks are basically gone, fighting Parthians and each other. They've conquered ancestral enemies, and they're experiencing a level of peace and prosperity that they haven't seen since the time of Solomon. Okay? Now, if you know your history, what happens in a country when peace breaks out? Right? What happens when there's no longer an enemy out there? Well, you turn on each other. Yeah, this happens over and over and over. You may remember, I don't think I covered this, but when the Romans finally conquered Carthage in the Third Carthaginian War, and make no mistake, the Carthaginians were the first ones who gave Rome a real fight in a long time, and it was a war the Romans almost lost a few times. When they finally conquered Carthage, that they took plows, do you know this? They destroyed the city, they killed everybody. And then they took salt and put it in the ground and plowed the salt in the ground so that nobody could ever build there again. Nothing's going to grow here again. That's how freaked out they were by the Carthaginians. Within 5 years, poets and politicians are mourning the death of virtue. Like they're talking about, well, we don't have an enemy now. Now we're going to start killing each other. And that's precisely what happened. Yeah? Well, that's what happened here. Okay, you have this king, Hyrcanus, and he did a great job, and everything's going great. And before he died, he stated his wish that his wife would rule, and that his oldest boy, Aristobulus, would serve as the high priest. Now you might think, wait, a female king? Jews had no problem with this. It didn't bother him at all. And that's not even an issue. But when he died, Hyrcanus, Aristobulus jailed his 3 brothers and his mom and named himself king and high priest. Right? So it's like you got this great dad who did great things and you learned nothing. As the moment dad died, he ordered the arrest of his brothers and his mom, and then he did this. To keep his brothers from causing trouble from jail, he starved his mom to death, right? So they had to watch their mom starve to death kind of across the aisle, just as a warning. This is how far I'll go, right? This is how far I'll go. It's in your best interest to not cause problems for me from prison. And it worked. But here's the thing. He died shortly after Aristobulus did. He had some disease, and we're going to see this affects the Hasmoneans, right? It's in them. But his brothers were freed from prison. Now, his oldest brother, Alexander, reigned as king and high priest. And again, I don't want to get into too much detail. Actually, I do want to. I just know I shouldn't. He gained territory. He lost territory. He did fine. He did nothing great, nothing terrible. His wife, Salome, served as queen. And then her son, Hyrcanus II, not named after the jerk, but named after the good one, was then named as the high priest and the king at her death. Okay? So we've gone female king for about an hour, and then a male king for about a month, and it just bounced back and forth. But again, these guys knew better than to mess with their own people. They were just killing each other. Now, Hyrcanus II, his reign was really short. Why? Well, his brother, Aristobulus II, rose up in revolt, and he succeeded. I might be able to do this in one show. Remember, I thought this is going to take 2 shows. I'm already on Aristobulus II. Okay. Now, there's all kinds of intrigue here. We could do a whole hour on the intrigue. There was hostage taking. There was all sorts of things. But what you got is Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, and they're brothers. And here's the thing. Hyrcanus loves his brother. And in the end, says to him, I'd rather lose it all than lose you. And he surrenders all of it. They went before they gathered all the people. They hugged and they cried and they reconciled. And Hyrcanus says, it's all yours. And this gives you a sense of him. He features pretty prominently in the future here. But he's just a sweet kid who it's going to get interesting. Aristobulus is not a sweet kid. He's tough. He's smart. He wants to be in charge. He knows he's good at it. And what he and Hyrcanus know is that Hyrcanus is not good at this. He's terrible at it. And that's going to factor in, because here's the thing. Enter the guy Antipater. Okay, Antipater. If you look it up, his name looks like it's spelled Antipater. Okay, but it's Antipater. And this is arguably the most important guy in terms of he's just going to throw a wrench in the whole thing. He's going to throw a wrench in the whole thing. He's an Idumean, and he's going to play some 3D chess here. He's going to juggle the Greeks, the Romans, and the Hasmoneans, and he ain't going to drop a ball. And he is dirty. He is treacherous. I think it was Josephus who described him as a deceitful wretch. So what did he do? So Hyrcanus, as you may remember, succeeded his widowed mom as ruler, and his brother, took over. And Hyrcanus said, I'm going to retire from public life. I'm going to go live somewhere. I'm going to have 1 billion kids, and I don't want power. I don't want any of this. But Antipater, when he saw that Hyrcanus surrendered to his bro, he started thinking, well, Aristobulus doesn't like me. And what if he replaces me in my position? He had some high up rank. I forget what he was. What was he? He was governor of a small territory. So he started doing some machinations here to save himself and to gain power. And he started with Hyrcanus, who was weak. Yeah? Antipater persuaded him, you got to fight your brother because he's going to kill you. I've got all kinds of sources out there. Your brother is plotting to kill you. And the only way for you to get out of this, you got to fight him. You started to fight him. People love you, right? They're afraid of your brother. They're not afraid of you. They'll join you. And in fact, here, let's set you up under the protection of an Arabian king in Petra, which Jordan, right? So it worked. Hyrcanus and the king in Jordan attacked Aristobulus in Jerusalem, and it turns into a fight. It was such a fight that it attracted the attention of a Roman named Pompey. Okay, Pompey the Great, Pompey Magnus. And I'll do this as quick as I can. At this point in Roman history, you're approaching the death of the Roman Republic. At this point, the Roman Republic was actually functioning as a republic, somewhat. And it was doing well. But again, the Carthaginians are dead, man. And so now you got all these successful, smart people who are good at war and have no one to fight and decide the best thing is to fight each other. You have three people, Julius Caesar, Pompey Magnus, and the guy whose name I always forget. Isn't that terrible? Crassus. Thank you. Crassus. That's my brother coming in strong. So what do you need to know? Crassus was the wealthiest man in the history of the world at this point, and he was an awful human being. Pompey Magnus, a brilliant general, ruthless. Julius Caesar, probably the smartest man alive, certainly one of the bravest. And he was backed by Crassus. Okay, why? Julius Caesar was in crippling debt his whole life. He constantly borrowed money. Crassus could pay off his entire debt, and it wasn't even a rounding error. But Crassus, of course, wanted something with that. He wanted power. The problem was he was born poor. And in that culture, you couldn't rule if you weren't born into the right family. So the three of these dudes come together, and they say, let's run it all. Right? And they make an agreement. I will never do anything that will damage your interests. We will never act in opposition to each other. Let's grab all we can. And that's what the three of them did. Okay? So basically, while you still have a republic-ish, you have three dudes really running the show. And two of them are ferocious warriors, brilliant generals. Right, Pompey Magnus is the guy who. So you've heard of the slave revolt? What's his butt? The slave, Roman slave who rose up. He's got a Greek name. I am Spartacus. Spartacus. Okay, you remember this? The largest slave revolt Rome had ever seen. Right, started with about 100 guys, and then it hit with 70,000 trained people, and Crassus bought an army with his ridiculous fortune, and after Spartacus had wiped out 2 or 3 Roman armies at this point. Crassus goose steps his people down there, pays off some pirates, it's a long story, to betray Spartacus and obliterates him. A small group of the 70,000, they figure somewhere between 1,500 women and children escaped and ran north. Now here's Pompey with a big army heading down to fight the war that's already done. He finds it was 3,000 women, children. Oh, sweet. He takes them, crucifies them, so that their crosses lined the road all the way back to Rome. And then he got to Rome, of course, before Crassus, and he said, yeah, I did it, put the slave revolt down, got all the credit. That's so Pompey, right? But guys, he crucified 3,000 women, children, and old men because he could, right? I mean, these dudes are ruthless, and they're beloved for it. Pompey sees this going on, and that's territory that he gets tax revenue from. Okay? He sees all this infighting. He sees Hyrcanus fighting Aristobulus, their brothers, and he's like, this is going to mess with my tax revenue. So what does he do? Pompey heads down there. We're going to negotiate this. Okay, we're going to negotiate this. Let's take care of it. And what did he do? He ruled in Aristobulus' favor. Okay, they came to him like a court in a sense, and he ruled in Aristobulus' favor. But he said to Aristobulus, "Leave your brother alone." Right? Just leave him alone. Let neither of you gain or lose anything. Give me a little bit of time to figure this out. That ticked off Aristobulus, who then said something we don't know what, that ticked off Pompey, who said, okay, Hyrcanus, you win. So now you've got this mess. But Hyrcanus is in charge. And what happened? Just what you think. His heart wasn't in it. He wasn't ruthless. His tax revenue was awful. His administration was disastrous. He couldn't be a tough, vicious man. And that's what you needed at that time. So, and make no mistake, Antipater is behind this whole thing. He's feeding this weakness in Hyrcanus and telling him, no, you're a compassionate and sweet boy. This is the right way to do it. And then he's going back to Pompey and saying, he's not collecting enough taxes. Maybe you should put me in charge. And eventually, Pompey just keeps adding to Antipater's duties and taking them away from Hyrcanus. And Hyrcanus isn't the sort of guy who's going to fight that. And Antipater is making sure it happens. Antipater ends up with more power. Hyrcanus ends up with less. Now, in the meantime, Antipater sees how important Roman power is, how big and fast it's growing, and he exploited it. He made sure the Jews were besties with the Romans, and he thrived, right? And here was the key. You got these three cats, right? Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus. Crassus is always going to side with Caesar. Right? The people are always going to side with Pompey. And it becomes a thing where these three start working against each other. And I can't get into it because I'll never quit. But man, you hit about a 70-year stretch of Roman history that basically looks like this. Carrie and Joe always worked together and had a great time. Carrie killed Joe and took over. Chuck saw that Carrie was weak from killing Joe, so he killed Carrie and took over. Jesse saw that Chuck was weak, and it is just a whole... And in the meantime, you still got a republic-ish, right? You have the appearance of republic, but nobody's vote matters. What matters is Crassus's money, Julius's political machinations, and Pompey's battlefield brilliance. And there's all these machinations, and somehow Antipater is on the right side every time. So when Julius Caesar and Pompey went to war in 49, 48 BC, Antipater made his first mistake. He sided with Pompey. And everyone thought Pompey was going to win. If you ever get a chance to read about that battle, what Julius Caesar did showed why he's considered one of the greatest generals Rome ever produced. Outnumbered, outmanned, he won an impossible battle. And he did it by being brilliant. Okay? But nobody saw that coming. And Antipater sided with Pompey, right? Well, Caesar beat Pompey. And Pompey, it appears, snapped. When he lost that battle, it appears he lost his mind. They think he had a stroke. He became placid and, I don't know. So immediately, of course, Antipater shifts over to Caesar, his new best friend. Caesar's not sure he buys it. Caesar is frickin' smart. You just can't... Guys, if you talk about, in my opinion, one of the smartest tactical humans, Julius Caesar. You have to put him up there. But anyway, Antipater got his shot. Long story. Julius Caesar ends up in Alexandria. I think he had the 13th Legion at this point. He had only about 4,000 guys. And I don't know, Egypt turned against him. We're talking 4,000 against about 50,000. Now, what the Romans had going for them was one Roman legion who was tough to beat. Didn't matter how many people you had. These were men who were groomed to be soldiers since they were boys. They fought together, lived together, and they adored Julius Caesar. But 4,000 against 50,000 is never going to go well. Antipater heard about Julius Caesar under siege in Alexandria and rushed there with 13,000 dudes, 13,000 soldiers. And Caesar took control of that army, and they wiped the floor with the Alexandrians. Okay? Now, for, quote, his demonstration of valor, Caesar elevated him. He made him a Roman citizen. He said you never have to pay taxes again in your life, and declared him a friend. And this doesn't mean like we Americans do friend. If Julius Caesar said you're your friend, and ask Mark Antony about this, he will die for you. He will do anything for you. Julius Caesar had 3 friends. And if you were one of them, your life is good. For the rest of Julius Caesar's life, whatever Antipater wanted, he got. Okay? And what does he want? More. And what does Julius Caesar do? What every Roman does. Oh, here's some more. Just sign this thing right here. Right? And I'll tell you what, I'll appoint that governor from now on. So Rome keeps gaining power, Antipater keeps gaining power, and the Jews are losing independence. But they really don't know it yet. Now, what's kind of funny is there was some dispute, and I don't want to get into it, within the Hasmoneans, who are saying, this guy's king. We're supposed to be king. And so they start, a little how you doing. And I don't want to get into it, but Antipater does some pretty awful things. Awful enough where everybody's like, bro. Yeah? And now he's in danger of losing. Because Julius Caesar even was like, bro. So what happened? Antipater gets to Rome as soon as he possibly could, presented himself to Caesar, stripped off his cloak, and said, look at these scars. They're my gift to you. I gave this gift years ago when I saved you in Alexandria. Right? So Julius Caesar says, yeah, I tell you what, you're right, you're in charge. That's it. Hasmoneans are kind of done. It's really funny. And of course, isn't that classic Julius Caesar? That's my friend. Sorry. Right or wrong. And again, if you ever get a chance to, another great one to read is about the brotherhood between Mark Antony and Julius Caesar, because it was the same type thing. You could not separate them, and they couldn't have been more different, right? Mark Antony, a rich boy who was a pig, right? What's his name? Anthony Everett wrote a book about him, and he said the funniest thing. He said, Mark Antony's personal life was a train wreck. Multiple children from multiple women, a raging alcoholic, a mess of a human. But you put a sword in his hand and give him an army to command, he can't be beat. He just didn't know how to lose. And you take Julius Caesar, this uptight noble who was born dirt poor, who was Mr. Discipline, and the same thing, put a sword in his hand and it's all over. And those two could not be separated. Their friendship defined a lot of this history at this time, but that's a side note. Anyway, so Antipater is kind of at his peak here. He's made the Hasmoneans powerless, the Romans happy, and the Jews are digging it. Things are going pretty good here. And it's not like your average Jew was walking around going, boy, there's political intrigue. No, they just pay their taxes and work. And if we're not getting killed by Greeks, we're happy. Yeah. So everything's good. And a couple notes. I do love this note. Quote, now, if the Jews were unhappy, Antipater had a way of dealing with that too. He would often remind them that he could become, quote, a severe master instead of your gentle governor should they grow seditious or unruly. Right? So he'd remind them, you've seen what I can do. I'm being good to you because you're being good to me. But I can be the other guy. And that kind of worked. He started appointing his sons. I am going to finish today. This is so cool. I thought this was 2 shows. He started to appoint his sons to key positions. And I could go through them, but the only name that matters is his son Herod, whom he named the governor of Galilee. Herod had a reputation for brutality and efficiency, and he liked Roman culture. Was he a Jew? Nobody really knows. He became-ish one. Was he born a Jew? Did he live as a Jew? No. But be this as it may, he married the Hasmonean daughter of what's his butt named Marianne. Okay, so now he has strengthened his bonds with the Hasmonean dynasty. His dad is the number one guy. Now, quick note, he was actually married and had children when he met Marianne, but he went ahead and got rid of them. So Antipater is poisoned, and now what do we do? Well, if you're Herod, you just kill everyone and take over. You convince the Romans, I'm your guy. Look at my dad Antipater. I'm just like him. And Judah was now firmly, totally, and completely under Roman control with a client king named Herod, whom is called Herod the Great. And 28 years later, Jesus is born. Okay? Now, Herod the Great's a complicated dude. At one point, I gotta see if I can find this. I actually typed in just how many family members did Herod the Great kill. I wonder if I can find it. I didn't think we'd get this far. Herod the Great. Sorry. This is worth your time. It's just an obscene amount of people. But how's this? He killed basically his whole family. He killed Marianne. He killed his boys. He was paranoid, insane, a butcher. But he also built some of the greatest architectural feats of that age. Nobody's even entirely clear on how he pulled off building Masada with the tools he had. What Herod did architecturally was unheard of. And it's just hard to balance. Like if you were a regular person, Herod the Great was probably a pretty good king to you. Your taxes were reasonable. He was in charge, and he killed anyone who could revolt, so you were guaranteed some peace. But there were things, of course, that made him awful. Like I said, he was a butcher, and he was the one who basically put the final nail in the coffin of Jewish independence. He said to the Romans, I will be your king. Romans had this concept called client kingship. And what it meant, if they had a tribe that they wanted to subdue or subject, but didn't necessarily want to throw too much manpower at it, or if they respected, and they did respect the Jews. The Romans were blown away by how old Judaism was. They had never heard of anything this old. But what they would do is say, all right, Jesse's your new king, and we pick your kings, and that king rules in our name. So that's what Herod was, a client king. And, there you go. He was politically brilliant. Now, eventually, they don't know what disease he had, but something rotted him from the inside out, but it wasn't leprosy. I've read that it was syphilis. I've read a few different things. No one really knows. What they do know is it definitely took his paranoia and jacked it up a notch. And this is the man who, of course, who ordered the slaughter of all the children in Bethlehem, 3 years old and younger. And like I said, he drowned his wife to death and laughed about it. And then he cried about it for years afterward. He killed all of his sons, I think. He crucified 3,000 Jews the year Jesus was 31 years old. What do you do? He was kind of Judea's Stalin. So that's what you got. So I've successfully walked us through, praise God, in just 3 shows, I think, or was this the 4th? Well, either way, 4th, from the Greek invasion and the revolt of Judas Maccabee, all the way to King Herod the Great.
There you go.
So, and again, we say the Great because of the stuff he built, not because he was like a super dude. Yeah. And let's see, are there any questions? I'll scroll up. No? Okay, no questions so far. So maybe we'll wrap it up here in just a moment. But Okay, we do have some questions. I hope you enjoyed this. It is one where we took a little diversion from our usual religious, inspirational, educational topics and moved more right into history. But the Bible, this is in the Bible, right? What we've covered here in 1st and 2nd Maccabees and in the Gospel of Luke. As well as then John refers to some Herod goofiness as well.
Yeah, you see where I'm going.
Pardon me?
You see where I'm going.
Okay, let me look. Bad guys have risen through history. Have there been women who have? You know, one, if you want to look up Boudica, Boudica, she was Celtic or Gaelic. I can't remember. I'm going to say a Celt, but don't quote me. Because it can get tricky. But in Britannia, during the rule of Rome over that area, and there was a governor named Agricola, who, anyway, Boudica, check her out. If you want a tough warrior woman who stuck it to the Romans hard, that's who you should check out. Boudica. Who else? I can't pronounce her name, but there is, type into Google, Soviet female sniper World War II. I don't know how to pronounce Russian names, but this is the human with the most confirmed kills in history. I believe she's over 300. Stalin had this big belief that only women could be snipers. I don't know if you know about this. It's really fascinating. If you want, there's a good book on, well, I mean, how do you read a good book on Stalin? I think it's called Archangel, and it's a book where they really try to look at Stalin, what made him so demonic. But in there's a whole chapter, if I've got the right book, about how he believed female snipers were better than male snipers. He said a woman will hold the grudge, right? He said a man will lose interest, a woman will sit and wait for the perfect shot. And he basically, to my knowledge, really only was interested in female snipers when the Nazis were invading the Soviet Union. But her name, I can't pronounce it.
Ludmila?
Yeah.
Lydmila.
Yeah, and does it say how many confirmed kills? I think it's unreal. Like, to give you a sense of things, 8 confirmed kills is considered a huge deal. Right, to be a confirmed kill, you have to have a witness that you shot the person, and that witness has to go and find the corpse. Right? It can't just be, I shot that guy. Does it say, brother?
Well, it says she claimed to have killed 309, but a lot of those have been called into question by various historians.
Okay. But I know she's a bad. Cleopatra is another amazing one. Gosh, Cleopatra. Holy crap. You remember how I told you about, she's the one who brought down Mark Antony. She brought down Julius Caesar in many ways. Killed her brother to take the throne. Yeah, I don't know. I could do this all day. I'm trying to think of.
Did she do it? Yeah.
It says she's credited with killing 187 soldiers.
Okay. One person, right? And I don't think anyone's close to that. And that's, you guys, with those old Masanagat, this was a 308. She was throwing a half a mile. Anyway, don't get me started. Would you list King Herod as the most brutal person in power? Oh, gosh, no. If not, who would you say is worse? Hitler, Stalin, Mao? You want to go per capita, you can't beat Pol Pot, right? I mean, he basically depopulated his own country. Genghis Khan is directly attributed with more deaths than anyone in history. The low end is 30 million, high end is 55 million. And this is at a time when there weren't 100 million, no, there weren't 300 million people in the world. I mean, think about that. Yeah, those guys wouldn't even, sorry, but In fact, no, don't get into that. Well, I should give you, I'm reading two really interesting books right now. One's called Thor's Angels, which is very neat. It's a look at the church and the Vikings and the Germanic tribes. And then the other one, if you'll stick with me, because this guy talks about how Stalin killed so many people in Russia that their population still hasn't recovered.
Wow.
It's really... Excuse my candor, it's not really the amount of people necessarily, it's how many people were alive at the time. So you look at World War I and the amount of deaths Americans suffered in that war, and frankly you might think, well, I mean, that's a lot, but it's not. It was 10% of the American population was fighting in a war. 10%. For us now, that'd be 33 million. Think about that. It's just there's so many more of us than there's ever been. Let me find, if you don't mind, I can never remember that. Here it is. The End of the World is Just Beginning. I don't know how to pronounce the author's name. It's something like Peter Zeihan, I'm guessing, Zeihan. That book is melting my brain. This is the guy who in 2018 wrote an article that said in 2022 the Russians are going to invade Ukraine. He called it. And they were like, how did you do that? And he said, oh, simple. Their population demographics, blah, 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 blah. And he walked you right through. Now, the other, you know what he says in there? China's going to collapse in this century. Wow. And he said, same thing. Their population bubble is going to blow. It's fascinating. Did you know China imports 90% of its food?
That's hard to believe.
Yeah. He walks you through all these numbers, and he's like, anyway, sorry. Why am I going beyond this? I don't know.
Good.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, this is the stuff I like besides Jesus and in baseball. I love reading about stuff like this. Yeah. Okay, so I'll leave you alone now. I'm being...
That's good.
Is it? Okay. And if you don't prefer to read, I know Joe Rogan interviewed this Peter, and I can't pronounce his name because that's how I found this book. 3 people sent me this interview, and they're like, you have to listen to this. Now, as a warning, Joe Rogan, I'm learning, is a fantastic interviewer. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard it? I hadn't really. Man, he can interview, but he does swear, and he says our Lord's name in vain, and that drives me nuts. But so as a warning on that, if you're going to check out this Joe Rogan interview, it's Peter's, I'm guessing Zeihan, I don't know. If you don't want to read the book, it's like a 3-hour interview, and it's totes worth your time. Okay, I've diverted us all over. Who are we listening to tomorrow? Which interview? Ricardo? No.
Jeremy.
Oh, Jeremy. Okay, great. So for those of you not familiar, there's a stand-up comedian, Jeremy McClellan, and one of the best I've heard in some time. And I can't recommend enough you watch the interview tomorrow. I interview him. Wow. And he's serious in the interview, which was actually, I found really nice. I thought, well, we're both screwy people who like to laugh. But no, he gets right after it. And I can't recommend him enough. If we can afford it, we're going to try to get him out here at Holy Family for a show. He did an hour of stand-up. If you've ever done stand-up, you know that's a bear. And he crushed it on the marriage cruise. I just can't say enough about him. And there's a deep faith life at work in there. Kara, do you mind moving your cursor? Oh, there we are. Watched War Horse last night. Great Steven Spielberg movie. Okay. Dad and I are always looking for, clean, good. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I read that China is suffering now because of that one child per family law they put in place long ago, and in the future will be trouble as the vast majority will be elderly. Yeah, and what I read is a couple things, like we had a nun from China who was Chinese talk about this thing they called picking babies. And it was that if you're only allowed one kid and there's no 401ks, then you need a male. right? So what happens if your first baby is a female? Well, they tended to kill it or to put the baby outside of convents. Did you know about this? There are so many Catholic nuns in China now because these beautiful, holy Chinese women would leave the convent and literally, quote, pick babies because they were just laying them in the field for the nuns to come and get. And it's sweet and it's awful. But when you have a population, they said it's 1.25 to 1 in favor of males. You need that reversed, right? You need a lot more females than males to keep a population going. But the other, like in that book, The World is Ending, the end of the world is just the beginning. He talks about China is not focusing on tech building, tech creating. They're focused on tech building. You come up with the idea and they build it, right? And he said no population that size can sustain itself. And then they're importing a vast majority of their food, a vast majority of their fuel. And that I think they're building a ton of nuclear reactors, but it takes 10 years, right? Is it 10 years?
I don't know.
I think it takes 10 years to get one functional. And this guy's thing is by the time those are built, China will have collapsed, he says, into 5 or 6 independent things. Fascinating stuff. I don't know if he's right. I don't know enough. But, man, yeah, crazy stuff.
Crazy. That's
It
crazy.
says here, China is forecast to lose almost half of its people by the year 2100.
Yeah, and his thing was, and they're never going to make it that far, right? Yeah, it's fascinating because if you get a chance, and again, please remember, this is his best guess. He's not a prophet. I don't think he's particularly religious. This isn't the fruit of prayer and visions. This is a dude whose sole job is to predict the future for governments. This is what he does for our government. Yeah. Fascinating, crazy stuff. But he said Russia invading Ukraine was the most predictable thing. And even the date. Because he said it's really simple. They'll never have this many males alive again. And he pointed to Stalin's purges and all the people who died under the communist rule, right? When you have a communist government, people die of hunger, like in huge, huge numbers. What is it? 60% of Russians don't have indoor plumbing. Something like that. It's insane.
That's great.
Yeah. And then he was talking about how their defense minister, this is crazy. A third of the defense budget in I keep saying Soviet Union, in Russia, goes to him personally. A third goes to Putin and his cronies, and then a third goes to the military. And I think I told you guys this at the beginning of the thing we did on the invasion of Ukraine. I was like, Russians are the worst at offensive warfare. I mean, just the worst. Right? I mean, you remember Japan beat the snot out of them at the beginning of the 1900s. I mean, just wiped the floor with them. And they're great at defense. They're awful at offense. And they've always been. But he says, the second phase of every Russian war he says, first phase, we get our butts kicked. Second phase, we throw humans at it. Bullet catchers. And he says, and this is their last chance to have enough people to catch bullets. It's crazy stuff. So, sorry.
That's okay. All good.
I'm really enjoying this book. I'm not enjoying the horror that it's describing, but I'm enjoying this dude's weird way of thinking. And I'm definitely enjoying the Thor's Angels book. I mean, that's just rock and roll history. Oh, okay. So that's it. And tomorrow we'll have an interview with a great guy, Jeremy McClellan. And then on Friday is our question and answer session. And that's it, I guess. Salad pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Jesus, thank you so much. Whatever our story ends up being, you're with us, and that's the only thing that actually matters. The machinations and games of powerful people, they might distress us or give us hope, but our eyes are fixed on you. Our eyes are fixed on you. Father, help us never to give in to evil just because it gives us a quick answer. Help us to always choose virtue, even if it costs us everything. And Jesus, you know what our brothers and sisters in Nigeria are suffering right now, and we ask, please come to their rescue. And Lord, we know that you see in our hearts and see that there's people we love very much and worry about. And you see all these little circumstances that we worry about. And with that, we give them all to you, Lord, because we love you so much and we trust you. And may Almighty God bless you all, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. My Kung Fu is strong. I'll see you guys tomorrow when we interview Jeremy McClellan. Until then, peace. Is it over?
No, it's never over.